I've stolen intro duties from John today, so we're just gonna launch in. Hello everyone, welcome to the Osint Bunker podcast. We just have me, our Osinttechnical, and Casus Belli here today with John. We're gonna talk about a lot of stuff today. I know the last time Cassius was on here, we may have had a bit of a conversation about why Russia wouldn't invade Ukraine, and I think we're going to have a bit of a post-mortem on that taken and sort of try to see where we, plural, I'll include all of us in there, were wrong, and where we were right, and sort of what we can do in the future to sort of cue that up and actually make it make sense. Um, we're also going to have some discussions, of course, because we also have Cassius here about sub-Saharan Africa, which I know we all ignore far too much based on its regional importance and involvement of a bunch of larger players. So I think we should just kick into it with starting on Ukraine. So I think I know I'll put Cassius on the spot here, but the last time you were here, you had the general opinion that this was probably a sort of a Russian ploy to put pressure on Ukraine. I think that conversation was in late January, if I'm not incorrect.
Yeah.
Um, I think. Do you have anywhere you think you were wrong, just like coming out of the gate?
First of all, thank you all for inviting me back and giving me the floor again. And also would like to salute the entire Osint community that have been involved in the war in Ukraine and continue its efforts. And yes, indeed, I wanted to assume that I was wrong about the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And I remember arguing for hours with Skype because I didn't think Russia will risk something so stupid, but guess what? They just did. So I guess we're here now.
Yeah, so I think all of us at that point sort of had assumed that any sort of involvement in Ukraine would be not
Yeah,
a great idea.
yeah,
And I
definitely.
think I think basically the different levels of calculus that we'd all put in was how willing Russia would have been to do something stupid. Um
Yeah,
and yeah, I think John and I were a bit more on the Russia's gonna do something stupid.
yeah.
Um
Well, you were right, definitely, and maybe this is also a sort of influence in your country, since France was basically saying the same, and they were saying even in the intel services they were saying like nothing will happen in Ukraine, and there will be no invasion, and finally it just happened. So I guess this is also kind of influence you can have on yourself when you're resident in a country, and you tend to always follow what's people saying in your country. So indeed, I was wrong, and it was kind of surprising, especially the week before the invasion, because I was looking around in the Russian news. I was watching all this stuff in Russia to see just how people behaviors on how they are considering the invasion. Indeed, one week before they started the invasion, I felt like, I mean, in my head, it was like, okay, they're going to do it because they really change their behaviors, and yeah, sometimes you you're you're not correct on your um assessment, and this is what happened in France, and we've seen the leader of military intelligence getting fired from um, his his job because of that. So yeah, I think this is a intel failure from France, and maybe we should more consider I mean, working with different countries and taking in consideration different opinions. But the thing is, in last year, it was kind of the same situation with Russia pulling all their army in the frontier with in the border with Ukraine, and yeah, this is why maybe I was like, okay, they have done it last year. They won't do it again. They won't invade because they're just putting pressure on Ukraine. Yeah, it was a complete miss in the end.
I think
Yeah, and I know. Go ahead, John.
I think in all fairness to you, Cassus, I don't think even we really fully understood the extent to which Russia was going to go ape.
Mm.
Frankly, um, I think it's fair to say we technical and I both strongly suggested that Russia's plans were going ahead, that there was going to be an invasion, but I don't think we quite expected things to turn out anywhere near the way they have done. Um, I think we've kind of discussed it before as well. We kind of
Yeah,
expected Russia to sort of roll on through and make light work of Ukraine, if we're being honest. And obviously that didn't
Yeah,
end up happening. And so, to an extent, we both missed the mark, really. Um, what ended up
yeah. I
happening was
think
probably a middle ground somewhere between no invasion and a successful invasion.
Yeah, I think there was a lot that we had focused on over the last year, based on the different Russian buildups, and we were definitely right in some places and wrong in other places. Like, at least in southern Ukraine, I think a lot of us were thinking that, the Russians were just gonna, invade Kherson Oblast, take that territory, and going any further wouldn't be a great idea because they'd be overextended. Well, they took Kherson Oblast, went, started trying to take more territory, got overextended, and are now getting pushed back. Um,
yeah,
I think a lot of what we didn't expect was the invasion toward Kiev. Um, and that fighting in northern Ukraine, which just turned into a slog for the Russians. Um, so
I think
I
I think they didn't. I mean, the Russian didn't even expect it. I mean, such resistance. I mean,
Mm.
they tried to invade from the north and finally just give it the north, to give up the north and just try to focus on the east in the Donbass. And yeah, I think you can have always your own assessment. You can have always your own intelligence and your own plans and expect things to go how you'd like there go. But finally, when you start something, it always go in another way. And Russia failed to I mean, go to Kiev, and now they're only focusing on the eastern Ukraine. This is, I think everyone was surprised by how Ukrainians uh, kept their line and kept fighting against Russians.
no, I think what I was trying to jump into and sort of ask Cassius before you spoke was whether or not this has sort of resulted in any sort of long-standing, cultural ramifications. I know the,
Yeah,
French intelligence chief was, sacked.
yeah,
But
he
there
was
there
quite.
were even controversies around that about what he was presenting, and whether or not it was accurate information or what he was being asked to present. Um, so I think, are there any larger sort of changes that have happened on sort of that military culture side of things?
Yeah, I think this war changed a lot of things in all European countries, and especially in France, because I think they, I mean, intel services and all this government services, they had to change their way of work. I mean, they had to learn more about all this situation in Ukraine, and I think they just thought again about how they're supposed to do their intel work in especially in Ukraine, because I don't think Ukraine was the main area monitored by France. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I think they were more focused in African countries and
Mm.
such stuff. But yeah, I think now there's a lot of how to say uh, learning on all this war teached us a lot of things on even I mean drone war, the use of drones, civilian drones, military drones, and how we can keep fighting against a far largest army with some equipments and some organization on the ground. And yeah, this is a very I'd say a very good listen, but it's a tragic war in fact. So yeah, it changed a lot of things in France, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, no, that definitely tracks with what I've seen happening in other European countries, especially well, Germany to a point, but
Yeah.
but definitely in Eastern Europe at least.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in Germany, I think, which now started to buy American jets and started to build again an army, which is very surprising because it didn't happen for decades. And yeah, all the European countries have changed their mind and changed how they're supposed to be part of NATO and all the organization, all the interconnection between intel services, and also one thing I think it's very important to talk about, but the place of Osint in all this war, because I think a lot of people um, are working now on Ukraine daily. And I think it provides a lot of information very important for uh, all the guys on the ground. And it's I think all the medias, all the journalists, everyone just realized how important Ozin can be in a ongoing war. And yeah, I think it's also taken in account in different countries in France, for example, and different European countries. So I'd say it's a good thing for defense, all the defense community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll continue to see sort of an evolution on that, especially as Europe recognizes that Russia may not exactly be the most logical actor
Yeah,
or an actor that subscribes to, the same reality that we do. I think we fairly clearly saw that with their invasion planning as well. Um, I just, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everyone kind of or in Europe is starting to accept that a national defense stance is needed at least until sort of wider issues are dealt with. At which at which that point maybe the 1990s attitude of restructuring can be taken. But until then, I think that'll continue to be the ongoing sort of understanding in Europe.
yeah, definitely. And yeah, it's very interesting to see all these changes in the defense community, in defense in general, and all the reorganization around NATO, on all these countries like Finland, uh, and Swedish, I think, Sweden, sorry. We wanted to join now NATO. It changed. I think this war changed a lot of things, not only in Europe but all around the world. Even in I mean in food security, and especially in Africa, which is a continent I monitor a lot, and you can see all the impact of this war uh, in African countries in Central Asia. So yeah, it's a very massive event, and I think it will definitely change everything for the next decade.
Yeah, and I know you started talking about Africa there. I know you wanted to sort of continue into that, and I'll let you do that.
Yeah, so on Africa, what I can say, there's a lot of things happening now. Let's start with the Turkish drone, which is largely used in Ukraine now, and I think it's very useful for the troops. There's multiple countries very interested in buying it now. Recently, we saw in Burkina Faso a Bayraktar drone, which is very, I'd say, unusual. Something very interesting because it means all these countries in Africa are now trying to, you know, get systems that can be able to chase against terrorism in their countries and fight terrorism for low, I'd say, when you don't have a lot of money. And yeah, Burkina Faso is one interesting country. You can see also Djibouti and also Ethiopia recently. There is more and more country interested. I know Congo is kind of interested, and they're talking about getting equipped with these drones. And yeah, this is one of the main interesting thing happening now in Africa. I think it's kind of related to the Ukrainian war because Ukraine often posted their success with this drone, so it's of course a good. I mean,
Good marketing.
yeah, good marketing definitely. So you can see multiple countries interested now, and yeah, there's still a lot of events since unfortunately terrorism is still very important, a very important issue in Africa, especially in Mozambique or Mali or let's say Somalia, or all these countries are still struggling with terrorism. And at the same time, you can see a lot of things related to Russia happening because I think everyone now knows the existence of Wagner PMC, and they're very present in Mali. At the same time, France is trying to get out of this country, and by August, I think they should leave the country and leave the last military base in Gao, if I'm right. And yeah, we've seen a lot of things happening, like some um, war communication, I'd say, with a mass grave in Gossi. Uh, Hopefully, French army try to debunk this event before, I'd say, local propagandist says it's France work or something. And yeah, it's a very, I'd say, important time now for Africa, especially Western Africa, because there's a lot of reorganization in the region. Um, and yeah, this is sort of even I'm monitoring these times.
And who do you think is sort of going to emerge as, a major power player in the region, as France sort of it not pulls out per se, but reduces their presence?
Well, I think there's a lot of countries now interested by I'd say French-speaking African countries. You can see obviously Russia with their PMC Wagner, and but there's also different countries like Turkey or the Emirates, and and more countries like China, for example. And these countries now have I'd say they have the opportunity to talk with more countries because before that, um, I'd say they had France had a sort of j- direct link with Mali, for example. But now, after two coups, they're trying to change their relations, and it's a opportunity, and at the same time, it's a problem because you know there's a lot of how to say um, Russian Wagner committing attacks on civilians and all this stuff. And I mean, they are PMCs. This is not like an army. Army have to um, always report all what are they doing, and PMC doesn't care. They can, especially recent PMC, I'd say, they just come and secure an area, and I mean they can kill civilians on things. Nobody cares. Nobody cares, especially with all this corruption. And another thing interesting, I think, is that they're trying to secure all the, let's say, gold mines and all raw resources, um, which is very interesting because at the same time Russia is under a lot of sanctions, and I think they're trying to find an issue to that by collecting gold on more in Africa. So I think we will see what happened in the next months, but it's definitely important.
Yeah, so this all comes down to the fact that sort of Russia is trying to avoid, or not avoid sanctions, but sort of find alternative methods, which I think we've seen actually when you look at the initial sort of propaganda around the start of the war. A lot of it was aimed at African nations.
Yeah,
That
definitely.
pro-Russian material, and that absolutely makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of African peoples just shared their videos in Mali or CAR, for example, and they were showing the total support to Russia. So there's a war in Ukraine, and at the same time, you can find another war in Africa, which is a influence war. Um, because Russia they don't have the same background as France. I'd say France was a colonialist country, and Russia can play with this argument because they're coming and saying, "Look, France was colonizing you. They started an operation for almost a decade, and nothing changed. So we're here. We're Russian. We're not. I'd say we're not racist. We're not colonialist. I'd say for in terms of African colonialism, and indeed, it's easier for Russia to go and dig in these countries, and also at the same time you have all the population in certain countries in Africa, in village, in cities, were tired of French prisons. So indeed, Russia is playing with that, and the thing is, Russia won't act the same way as France does because France really, I'd say, doesn't have their own to say their own way to work in Africa. They won't. I'd say most of the time they won't target civilians.
They don't have their own state-backed
Yeah, exactly.
disinfo sort of
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah, exactly. This is what I wanted to say. And at the same time, Russia provide a lot of military stuff for African countries like helicopters or weapons or ammunition. And they're just sending a lot of all this equipment, and it's also a great opportunity because when you're in an African country, you don't have a lot of money. You need maybe to fight terrorism at the same time. And then Russia just come at you and say, "Hey, do you want some helicopters? Do you want some training? And I give you everything for free because I don't want money because of sanctions, but I want your gold or your exploitation in your country." And yeah, this is a different way to act in this country, and there's a big war influence, I'd say, in Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see that going into the future of I guess as countries sort of compete for that resource base and that population base. Especially as they continue to sort of develop as well.
Yeah, exactly. And for example, if you go to Mozambique, you can see a lot of terrorism, sadly. You can see a lot of things happening there. Um, at the same time, you can see there's a lot of influence. I know India is very involved in this country. Russia at the same time try to exchange because they were present back in last year or 2 years ago with Wagner PMC. But they just left the country because they couldn't handle all the terrorists. And what's interesting here is if you focus on a African country, you may know they are speaking French, like in Mali or such countries, and you start seeing a lot of different countries acting there. You start seeing Turkey selling some APC. You start seeing a lot of different countries coming, which is very unusual because this is an area where France played for decades, and yeah, this is definitely important to see. And at the same time, the biggest problem for African countries now is food security, because of course all this war in Ukraine created a large food insecurity, even for Middle East, for example, or Asian countries, but especially in Africa. And this is a very difficult way for these countries because again Russia will try to provide at least a solution, and they will propose them to just exchange maybe, let's say, wheat for gold or something like that, because Russia want to build its own uh, economic system with China and all these countries, and at the same time African countries needs this food because it will be a mess otherwise. So this is a very complex situation, and yeah, this is what I'm saying almost every day.
Yeah. And I think we'll see the situation continue to develop into the future,
Yeah,
which
definitely.
I think I always say. But back to I think we should probably cycle back to Ukraine right now to not finish up, but just continue. But I mean, from what we've seen over the past week, and I've said this a few times, that I'll say my prediction in private was correct because I actually never bothered to say this publicly, but it does seem like the Ukrainians pulled back from Lysychansk in order to avoid a larger encirclement. Um, which I think today has definitely it gave the Russians not a strategic victory, but definitely a messaging victory. As they were, able to take pretty much the remainder of Luhansk Oblast and sort of exert this control over an area that they previously had intended to exert control over. Um, so moving forward, the Ukrainians have obviously, made it clear that they want to do defense in depth, of being able to sort of retreat without taking casualties, give up land in exchange for time. Um, does anyone here sort of have a thought about when or where that ends?
Well, maybe John want to say something.
I think, as you say, the Ukrainians are obviously having to deal with this very, very strategically. They are having to look at certain situations and retreat in order to avoid mass casualties. Obviously, that's not something they're going to be prepared to do at every situation. Um, should Russia ever reach Kiev again, we will probably see them fight tooth and nail for every, square inch of ground that they lose. Um, but I think what the Ukrainians are realizing at this point is that the Russians are really struggling. The Russian advance, the sort of movement of Russian kit, has very much stalled, I think it's fair to say. And we've obviously seen in the last few weeks, the leadership of the Russian troops in Ukraine has been changed several times. Vladimir Putin replaced two of his senior commanders in Ukraine last week after they basically failed to meet a June deadline that he'd given them, for achieving certain aims, one of which I believe was to capture, was it Luhansk or one of the other large cities?
Severodonetsk, I
Yes,
think.
Yeah,
Severodonetsk.
that's the
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Severodonetsk. Um, and obviously the Russian senior leaders in Ukraine are, as I say, constantly changing. That's obviously not having a positive impact on the troops beneath, because when your leader's changing every few weeks, you start getting different orders, different plan. Um, we've obviously seen a lot of issues with, but particularly in sort of the early weeks and months of the war, a lot of Russian troops deserting. We're not hearing so much of that now, whether that's because the Russians have now kind of got a lid on a lot of sort of social media activities of the troops, or whether it's just genuinely not happening now, and whatever's left of the Russian troops is a genuinely supportive, or pro Putin, and pro invasion group. Um, but yeah, I think Ukraine is going to have to make these calls every time they are pushed back. They're going to have to decide which cities they are prepared to fight for and which ones that they need to sort of just let go. And unfortunately, until such time as Russia really sort of loses any signs of having an edge, any signs of numerical superiority, Ukraine is going to gradually lose territory, and they have to very much hope that the Russians run out of kit and run out of people before Ukraine runs out of territory to sort of retreat through, or to fight over.
Yeah. I think even if Ukraine lost some cities like Severodonetsk or Lysychansk on different small village, I think they were still able to inflict a lot of damage on Russian troops, even if in now I feel like Russian troops learned from their mistake in the beginning of the war, because we all remind all in the beginning, all this vehicles destroyed and all these losses in the Russian side, and now I feel like they're just um they're not extending too much, so they're afraid to lose a lot of troops against Ukrainians, and at the same time, Ukrainians with all this Western military equipments uh, keep fighting back, and they're just making a very interesting use of civilian drones, for example. I think we now have a lot of pictures and footage of the small DJI drones,
Mm.
which is very interesting because they were already used before the war, but it's a civilian drone made in China. It's a DJI is a Chinese company, but you can buy this drone on let's say Alibaba or anything, and it's used a lot on both sides. But I think Ukrainian forces started to buy a lot of these civilian drones, and it's very useful because it's cheap and it's easy to use, and you can easily inflict damage on armored vehicles and even on some ground positions. And yeah, this is a very complex situation. And at the same time, Ukraine can also inflict damage in Black Sea because we all have seen also this platform, in the Black Sea, uh, Russian platform destroyed, and it's still on fire for now. And yeah, this is, I think, the small actions which can lead Ukraine to inflict the maximum damage on Russian progression. So I don't know if you if you can say it in if you say it in English, but it's a Paris victory. I don't know if it's correct.
Oh, Pyrrhic
Uh,
victory. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
No
yeah,
one,
yeah,
no one wins. No one wins.
yeah. I think it will be something close to this situation, uh, and at least Russia will have to suffer a lot of losses for any progression. But at the same time, I feel like they learned a lot from the ground, because I don't know. I had the feelings that they were sometimes very missing on the ground, and yeah, I feel like they both sides learned a lot of on tactics and operation on the ground, and yeah, this is very interesting. Also, for example, today we have seen all this AMO, uh, Russian AMO, how to say, uh,
Ammunition dumps going
ammunition.
boom.
That, yeah,
Yeah.
going boom. So yeah, you see Ukraine keep fighting, and you see a lot of Russian position destroyed, while at the same time Ukraine is fighting on a very large front. So I think with Western equipments, it will go to Paris, maybe Paris situation.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think we will end up seeing that sort of back and forth fighting where the Ukrainians are willing to give up land in order to continue, inflicting Russian casualties, especially in the east. Though at the same time, we'll probably continue to see Ukrainian advances in the south. Recently, it was reported that the Russians were actually forced to move units from the Zaporizhzhia sort of frontal area in order to move them towards Kherson to replace losses in that area. The VDV units there have been especially savaged since the beginning of the war. They've been fighting on the ground now for months. Um, and it's not like they got reinforcements because the other VDV units up by Kiev were just basically destroyed and then had to try to reconstitute with any, um, backup or reserve assets still left in Russia. Um, so I think a lot of these guys are running on borrowed time, at least in the South. Because again, as I said earlier, they overextended themselves and now they're stuck into a situation where
Yeah.
the Ukrainians are trying to push back.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder if this war will last for years, because of course it's a very big problem for I'd say European economies,
Mm.
especially in Germany and I mean France, and I guess even the UK. With all these prices going up, skyrocketing, and yeah, I wonder if it will last for years, which will be, I think, a problem for everyone. I mean, including Russia, or if it will be like it will froze at some point, and it will end maybe like Georgia.
Mm.
So yeah, I wonder how it will go, honestly. But what I see and what I understand is Russia is making small advances and lose a lot of things to gain small parts of territories. While at the same time, Western countries keep sending a lot of weapons. I think they started to use EMARS yesterday. I'm not
Mm.
sure.
There were indications that they had been using it about a week ago. There were some strikes that fit very closely into the profile of what would be expected to be a HIMARS strike. Though they definitely have been using them.
Okay. So this is very interesting. Also, there's I'd say let's make my own marketing for my country, but this Caesar um artillery, and yeah, I think it's a very useful system for Ukrainian army. So far, I understood they really like it. They really like the this Caesar system. And yeah, I think Western countries, especially the US, will keep sending a lot of weapons and inflicting a lot of damage on Russian progression. And yeah, another side of this war is, of course, Osint. Um, I think all this information we're sharing every day is very helpful for the guys on the ground and very helpful for the Intel community in general. I might be wrong, but I really think it's useful and used by a lot of maybe services, or at least they keep an eye on it. And I think this is maybe a game changer because we've seen so many things with all this using. We've been watching all these cameras in Ukraine, and watching all the progression and all these people making maps and following, tracking all the positions. I think this is a very interesting new, let's say, new side of the war, because I when back in the war in Chechnya or something, there were no Osint on Twitter or something. So I think this is a very important part of the war, and yeah, I don't know. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've in the last sort of 24 months, we've kind of covered a number of different conflicts, and I think it's fair to say that the Osint community has sort of been able to go into a great deal more detail with the situation in Ukraine than, say, for example, the Azerbaijan Armenia conflict we had not that long
Yeah.
ago. I think we were fairly limited even with the Afghan withdrawal in terms of what information we could really glean and sort of provide to, media sources and to the wider world. And I think,
Yeah.
as you quite rightly say,
Yeah.
we're seeing with Ukraine, because there is so much more, civilian tech, because it is very much more a war that is, affecting somewhere a lot closer to home for, a lot of us in the community. We are
Yeah.
far better able to sort of find sources for these information, get these videos, get these photos, and so on, and get that kind of real time information.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a very first big experience for Asian community, because it's like you said, it's a European country with a lot of civilian technologies, so you can easily access to them. I mean, like for example, cameras and stuff. It's not the same issue when you're going to Afghanistan or any African country because you don't have a lot of internet or civilian technologies. So yeah, this is a very weird war in some way, because you can, I mean, I remember hearing with the radio a lot of Russian troops using their radio and stuff, and this is very the first, I'd say, at least for on my side, it's the very first experience uh, in a war between two countries, with all this information easily available on internet, and this is very, I think Ozin played a very important game in this war. And maybe what I've seen, which is interesting, is even the Russians started to make their own Osint in some way. I mean, maybe you guys know Rebar, or I don't know how to call them, but they're trying to do their own Osint, and it's interesting because it means now all these countries involved in this war understood the importance, I'd say, of Osint and trying to uh, implement implement it in their own analysis, and this is a very good thing. But I don't know, what do you guys think about it?
I mean, I think the OSINT community in general have increased their skills
Mm.
over the past 3 years, at least, from when I started, which was, probably like, I don't know, 2014. There was during the initial conflict in Iraq, there was or far less mature capabilities.
Yeah,
The genesis of it was there, tracking videos to establish, presence and different movements um, in different areas. Just trying to sort of get an established view of what was happening. Um, I think at the end of the day, a lot of the research that's been done and a lot of the the development that's been done for the community's capabilities, between the various large organizations that do open source intelligence and some of the smaller creators that have combined sort of that news aggregation element with the verification and sort of open source analysis of a situation. That definitely has matured. And Ukraine has been the first really big test since open source intelligence got not popular per se, but uh, more developed. And we've seen it work. We've seen it work very well. It's been able to cut through a lot of issues. It's been able to give people a far clearer view of what's happening. Um, Especially when you look at some of the stuff like the Bucha and Irpin massacres,
yeah,
various Russian war crimes. Open source intelligence was able to verify that. was able to verify the presence of graves, was able to uh, 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 shed light on those war crimes. That I think other more traditional news reporting methods wouldn't have been able to do as effectively. And we've seen traditional news outlets switch and also offer those open source products where they're analyzing reported videos to verify them in a different way. And we'll continue to see that moving into the future as a popular option for more
Yeah,
traditional media, especially as they report from a chaotic war zone.
And I think
exactly. And yeah, go on.
I think what you mentioned just there about the war crimes side of things is particularly important because obviously, as with any conflict, a war crimes commission is set up by the international community. There are various agencies around the world who get involved in investigating allegations of war crimes and so on. And I think the Osint has, as you say, it's expanded and it's grown, it's become more prevalent, and it's going to be particularly helpful with these investigations of war crimes for this particular conflict and other conflicts moving forward, because the sheer amount of video footage and photographs and so on that is sort of being spread by the OSINT community that otherwise might never have seen the light of day, and a lot of
Yeah,
that information I know is being picked up by these war crime commission investigators, and they are looking through these videos and these photos, and they are, using that information to build their cases.
yeah. And for example, in France, I'd say wasn't really well known practice, I'd say. And with this war in Ukraine, it just put the light on this activity, which is very interesting because now we have far more people able to uh, dig on these subjects and keep following what's going on in Ukraine,
Mm.
following all these mass graves, following even uh, the wheat stolen by Russians in Russian Ukrainian controlled areas, um, where they just stole all the grain, the Ukrainian grain, and you can track that with satellite imagery, and it's very a very interesting thing that it's now more, I'd say, popular, because now a lot of people can be involved in all this stuff and keep investigating on what's going on and exposing all this events on the ground. This is a very interesting situation for the next decades because, of course, we have the war in Ukraine right now, but I think the second area we will be following maybe in the next decades will be Taiwan, because it's very sensitive, a very sensitive area, and in fact, I think all even China is currently watching what's going on in Ukraine and try to evaluate how it will go if they do the same with Taiwan. So I think OSINT will be very useful if anything happens there, and I think it's very important to take it in account now, especially for journalism, but also for all the private investigation or even I'd say intelligence services.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I again, we'll continue to see things mature, um,
Yeah.
and it really depends on how effective it is at the end of the day. Like it's a huge question about um how our skills or the community skills in general will continue to mature. We've seen great steps being taken, but there's still obviously more that can be done. Um, a lot of and not to get into recent drama, of course, that the community has had, but self policing um it is, I think, an important thing to keep in mind that's going to be something that the community is going to have to do in order to maintain some credibility. There have been bad actors. There absolutely have. And it seems like a large number of a large portion of the viewing public um is willing to um believe them or give them credence because they want to believe them, not because they have any evidence or uh, any sort of backing or any sort of credibility. They believe them because they're saying what they want, to believe. Because they're putting forward a good story. And I think that's something that the community will have to reckon with.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think it will be also interesting to have more and more people making Ozin, because of course you will have more areas monitored. For example, I know Africa isn't a very popular area, and also Southern America. I don't know a lot of people monitoring this area, so yeah, at least I'd say the good point is we will have more and more people making Osint, and maybe keeping an eye on different areas around the world, which is which is a big benefits for the using community. And at the same time, we will have indeed more and more people with you know s- stating some information which is not always verified. So yeah, this is we will see how it goes in the next years, but I think it's a great success in some points, because we've been able to follow all the events in Ukraine, and I think it was very helpful for people on the ground, even civilians. And yeah, I hope it will keep expanding this way, and we will have hopefully more people monitoring, I don't know, Afghanistan or Ukraine or Taiwan or all these countries. And yeah.
It's a fair point you make, Casus. I mean, we've got sort of the core group, I suppose, of the OSINT community, as we would regard them, is what, around 50, 55 members at the minute. We sort of have a little group of people, many of whom have been guests on the podcast over the last 12 months. And it's fair to say, as you quite rightly pointed out, a lot of them have overlapping areas of expertise. We do have quite a few people focused on sort of Middle East events. We've got a lot who are very good with sort of flight tracking and sort of satellite imagery analysis and stuff like that. As you say, you're probably one of a very, very small number who sort of look at the African continent. I know we've got one or two accounts who sort of very closely
Mm.
follow aspects of South America. So particularly back when Venezuela was very strongly in the news, they were kind of the go-to sort of accounts for news from that part of the world. But as you say, ultimately we do kind of hope that there are going to be more people who sort of step up and do OSINT, and hopefully fill some of the gaps that do exist, so that we are able to present a bigger picture, a more detailed picture, and one that is sort of universal rather than just, as you say, focused on certain areas of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And that diversification is what makes OSINT powerful. Is that, anyone with a bit of effort can do it. And anyone, it doesn't really matter that person's background, as long as they can provide, verification and proof of what they've done. Um, which,
Um,
it is important, but it is something that people can do. That's the open aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to sometimes stay humble and just say if you don't know, you don't know, and just ask for help because of course you can't know everything on Osint or you can't know everything on a particular area you're monitoring, and you may find some specialists on Twitter or people who are studying these areas, and it's I think it's important to keep exchanging between OSINT accounts. So it's getting always more powerful when you're making. I mean, there's an exchange between all these OSINT countries. So
Mm.
OSINT accounts, sorry. So yeah,
Yeah, that
I think yeah.
that is the beauty of this sort of little community of 50 or so accounts that we have, that we do regularly communicate between ourselves, and we do have an ongoing discussion, which, I mean, I regularly come home from a shift at work and find, in excess of 300 messages, just in that one little sort of group chat that we have, where it will be all sorts of things that have been going on throughout the day that I've sort of missed, and it does really help to have all those people, different time zones, different areas of expertise, as we say, who are constantly round the clock monitoring what's going on, analysing stuff as it comes in, and yeah, there is a real beauty to it, particularly because I think it's fair to say 95% of us don't actually know each other, from anyone else. It's we do what we do, we have a passion for it, and we work really, really well together as a group.
Absolutely, yeah, and the cooperation is a huge element of this. Is everyone works together, and we'll correct each other, or we'll help each other on geolocation, or we'll serve as some weird form of red team analysis on each other's work. But it is really important, the cooperation that we do.
I totally agree, and like John said, it's very interesting to have different people living around the world. We have people in America and Europe, and it's very interesting because you have always someone awake and keeping an eye on an interesting area. And for example, I have always Gurjan working with me for Africa, and
Mm.
we're exchanging a lot since he's very good at tracking aircraft. And I have a lot of information on the ground. I have imagery, and we exchange a lot. And this is what make finally using so powerful. And I think it's very important to keep this cooperation and yeah, keep learning, keep improving, and trying to do our best.
All right, so I think after that massive self-pleasuring there for, a solid 20 minutes, um, is there anything else anyone wants to talk about, sort of, before we end this episode?
Yeah, maybe I just want to say that my main account was suspended, and just for now, I'm trying to find a way to resolve this issue. But I think it will be back soon. And
You're not
other
the
than
only one. Hey, 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 if anyone from Twitter is listening, you guys gotta
yeah.
unscrew up this. Like, seriously, you would not do this to news accounts or anyone verified, and it's, yeah, stupid.
Yeah,
It
Yeah, I
really
think it's
is.
yeah, I think it's
unfortunately,
very
it's not the
poor.
first time we've seen Twitter doing this. I think rather famously for this podcast, not all that long ago, one of our very own co-hosts, Kyle, one of the accounts that he runs, was
Mm.
suddenly taken down by Twitter with no explanation.
Less than 24 hours before the invasion started.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I'm hoping that in that particular instance, Twitter was just making a mistake, and that there was no sort of malicious targeting of said account, particularly with the way that things worked out and the timing of everything that happened. That said, it is something that unfortunately we do see as a community far more often than we would ever hope to see. As Technical alluded to earlier, we've obviously seen a number of accounts recently that are sort of purporting to be part of the Osint community, albeit the sort of more extended reaches of the Osint community. And unfortunately, some of those accounts have not necessarily been as accurate and as faithful with the information that they provide. And unfortunately, we sit and watch as Twitter does nothing with those. And then, as in Casus's case, as with Kyle's case with the conflicts account, we suddenly see very reputable and oftentimes very, very well-known accounts. I believe the conflicts account had, 300,000 followers at the time when it was taken down by Twitter at the start of this conflict. That's obviously, not helpful in the grand scheme of things, not just for the Osint community in sort of making the world aware of what's going on, but also for the people who actually benefit from the information that we share. And I appreciate that there is a lot going on with Twitter at the minute, particularly with all sorts of attempted buys and so on recently, but it is something that hopefully we are going to see less of, and hopefully accounts like Casus are not going to find themselves suddenly banned or taken down in quite the same way, or at the very least not nearly as frequently as we have been seeing it in the last sort of 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something I'll always advocate for. Period. End of story. I legitimately don't think there's much I can add to that I haven't already said.
Yeah, I think I'm good. Thank you for inviting me, and I hope I will be back again so we can keep talking on different topics on Africa, since we don't have a lot of people doing it. And yeah, thank you all, and I wanted to greet everyone working in Osint, and keep doing what you're doing, guys. This is a very
You
good thing.
are our crutch for African issues that we are terrible at covering. And
Well,
we hope to keep having you on to cover them.
yeah, sure, it will be a pleasure.
And
All right, and on that note, go ahead, John. Sorry.
And on the topic of the Osint community, what we'll do is with this episode we will put a link to an article from the UK Defence Journal, which weirdly enough I had actually forgotten I wrote. It has been, well, I think I wrote it literally days before the outbreak of the conflict in Ukraine, and at the bottom of the article is just a list of some of those members of that sort of core Osint group. So we'll put the link to that article in the description of this episode so that you guys can go on, find those accounts, and get following if you're not already following them. We've got the likes of Casus, myself, Technical, various other guests that we've had on the podcast over the last 12 months, as I said, the likes of Aleph, Intel Air and Sea, Intel Doge, the Aurora Intel. I was going to say triplets, but they're not triplets. There's just 3 of them, and various other accounts as well, who are definitely worth a follow. And with that, I believe we are going to wrap it up. So thank you very much for listening. This has been Season 4, Episode 2 of the Osint Bunker podcast, and we will be back hopefully in about a fortnight's time with another episode.